is Holy Trinity, Anglican Church, Vancouver. I was watching a Second World War movie. Before they attacked, the commander gathered his squad around for a prayer. This made an impression on me. Why was that? Was it because, as a Christian minister, I felt empathy? Was it because these hardened soldiers didn't fit the churchy stereotype? Or, and this is what I'm worried about, was it because I've so imbibed the spirit of this age that prayer seems, well, let's put it politely, out of place? One of the things I've heard said during what we've been going through for 2 years now is that people went through far worse during the war. To which my response is yes, and, in a way, from my point of view, no. One of the things I'm getting at is the churches being closed. Sorry to harp on about this. The churches were never closed during the war, far from it. And also, there was back then a willingness to include God in the picture. And that was the case from the top, the leadership, and at grassroots level. How different things are now out there. What did Lord Nelson do before going into battle in 1801? Can you guess? He read his Bible. Didn't he have something else to do? Something more important, or relaxing, or empowering? Apparently not. And the passage he read just happens to be the one we're looking at today. Please turn to Acts chapter 27, page 1086 in the Church Bibles. Verse 9. Much time had been lost, and sailing had already become dangerous because by now it was after the fast. So Paul warned them, "Men, I can see that our voyage is going to be disastrous and bring great loss to ship and cargo and to our own lives also." But the centurion, instead of listening to what Paul said, followed the advice of the pilot and of the owner of the ship. I can sort of see it from the centurion's point of view. First, Paul was a prisoner, and the pilot and the owner of the ship were the ones with the qualifications. Surely, best practice, according to the pre-voyage risk assessment, dictated to do as they said. What could be said on the other side? First, the date. It was after the fast. The fast was the Jewish Day of Atonement, which fell either in October or late September. The NIV Study Bible tells me the Romans considered sailing after September 15 doubtful and after November 11 suicidal. So Paul did have that on his side. Second, Paul had prior experience in these matters. He was very well travelled, and he had already been shipwrecked 3 times. He mentions them in 2 Corinthians 11:25. But the point I want to make, and forgive me if you think I'm reading into the text, is I wonder if Paul's status as a preacher man, a God botherer, was held against him. Perhaps I'm rather sensitive to this. People find out you're a clergyman and suddenly you're too heavenly minded to be any earthly good. We got an indication of this last week in what the Roman governor said. At this point, Festus interrupted Paul's defence. "You are out of your mind, Paul," he shouted. Acts 26:24. There used to be a saying in Britain, "Too much religion makes you queer." I suspect that phraseology has now fallen out of use, if not the sentiment behind it. Verse 13, things started off okay. When a gentle south wind began to blow, they thought they had obtained what they wanted, so they weighed anchor and sailed along the shore of Crete. When things went wrong, my father was wont to say, "Who would have thought it?" To which the thought bubble above my mother's head read, "I would." There's an expression, the calm before the storm. Or how about the parents who think it's suspiciously quiet up there? We like to think we've got everything nicely sewn up, going according to our plan. And then we need to get our head around the fact that we are all fallen people living in a fallen world. Bad things happen. Indeed, peace and tranquility may be thought of as the exception rather than the rule. Verse 14. Before very long, a wind of hurricane force called the northeaster swept down from the island. And from that point, things continue going downhill, if one can use that expression, at sea, until, verse 20, when neither sun nor stars appeared for many days and the storm continued raging, we finally gave up all hope of being saved. I'm not a great sailor, or at least I hadn't used to be. I seem to have been a bit better of late. I know what it's like to feel wretched on a boat. I want to die. Neither sun nor stars meant no navigation, no sense of where they might be. We finally gave up all hope of being saved. Who was the we? Clearly Luke was there, as he's the one writing Acts. Also, the graphicness of the description indicates it's an eyewitness account. Is Paul included in the we? Had he given up all hope of being saved? I think what Paul says next indicates that it's the men who had gone a long time without food who were despairing, rather than Paul himself. Reading from verse 22, Paul said, "I urge you to keep up your courage, because not one of you will be lost. Only the ship will be destroyed. Last night, an angel of the God whose I am and whom I serve stood beside me and said, 'Do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand trial before Caesar. And God has graciously given you the lives of all who sail with you. So, keep up your courage, men, for I have faith in God that it will happen just as he told me.'" There is past precedence for this. Acts chapter 23, verse 11. The Lord stood near Paul and said, "Take courage. As you have testified about me in Jerusalem, so you must also testify in Rome." Then it was Jesus. This time it's one of his angels. Don McLean sang, "They would not listen, they did not know how. Perhaps they'll listen now." Just so you're not racking your brain for the rest of the service, the song was called Vincent. Perhaps the others would now be more open to hear what Paul had to say, with him having been proved right once already. As Paul says, verse 21, "Men, you should have taken my advice not to sail from Crete. Then you would have spared yourselves this damage and loss." Paul is ever the evangelist. He speaks of the God whose I am and whom I serve, and God's graciousness. He tells them, "I have faith in God, but it will happen just as he told me." Isn't that an invitation for those listening to share in that faith? Particularly, of course, when what Paul says will happen comes true once again. What do we think has been going on here for the last couple of years with coronavirus, etc.? I'm willing to see it as a wake-up call from God. Certainly, I think, we were complacent. It won't happen here. 3 weeks and it will all be over. But its value as a learning or growing experience depends on our reaction now. What have you learnt? What's been people's take-home? I wonder about this, I really do. Are people closer to God as a result? I think some are, and I thank God for that. Or does it send some in the opposite direction? Certainly there's been the fear factor in evidence and a seeking of redemption from those who can offer only platitudes. Friends, we need to factor in the God factor, because he's there whether we do so or not. That's the real reality check, and he will have the last word. Lord, whom winds and seas obey, guide us through the watery way. In the hollow of thy hand, hide and bring us safe to land. Amen.